Who is the person experiencing all of this? I've been reading, listening, and learning about these ideas surrounding consciousness, philosophy, spirituality, and the nature of the self. Pay attention, I'm not talking about the nature of itself, I'm talking about the nature of the self. And I don't want to present any of this as an absolute truth. I'm still figuring it out. I just want to document all of this because I'm still growing, I'm still learning, or because I know that I'm going to change. My understanding is going to change. Maybe the things that I believe today might sound completely naive to me 10 years from now. But I want to have a record of all of this, the evolution. And one of the ideas that I've come across recently has stayed in my mind, and that's Tatwamasi. If I shortly want to explain what's Tatwamasi, it's a Sanskrit phrase from the Chandogya Upanishad. It translates roughly to you are that. Now that sounds incredibly simple, almost anticlimactic, but the simplicity is deceptive. Now, before you understand the statement, you have to understand what you means and what that means. Now, this might sound confusing and very weird, and that takes us into something much more metaphysical. Metaphysics is basically the branch of philosophy concerned with the fundamental nature of reality, not just what it exists, but what reality actually is underneath everything we perceive. Yeah, now that's very deep, right? And that's exactly where the idea begins to become interesting. When I say that I am Sahil, what exactly am I referring to? Am I referring to my body, my memories, my personality, my thoughts, or maybe my experiences? What am I exactly referring to? Because none of these things that I'm talking about are permanent. My body has changed, my opinions have changed, my ambitions have changed. Even the way I understand myself has changed. Now, seriously, when I dive into this, everything has changed. So, everything that I normally use to describe myself is subject to change. Then, what exactly is the thing I keep referring to as I? Now, this is where introspection becomes important. Introspection simply means turning your attention inward and examining your own experience. So, instead of looking at the world and asking, what is that? You turn your questions towards yourself and ask, what am I actually experiencing right now? You will notice a thought. When you think deep about it, maybe you're thinking about work, maybe you're thinking about appearance, maybe you're thinking about something else, then another, and it just keeps piling up. Now that you're thinking about all of this, you can observe your thoughts. There is an interesting distinction between the thought and the thing that is aware of the thought. The same thing happens with emotions. You can be angry without anger lasting forever. You can be deeply sad and then days later feel completely different. You can fall in love, fall out of love, become obsessed with something, eventually stop caring about it altogether. Everything seems to move. This is impermanence. That's the idea that everything within our experiences is constantly changing. And yet, somehow, through all these changes, there is a continuity of experience. You look at a photograph of yourself from 10 years ago and think that's me, even though almost everything about that person may be different. So, what is this continuity? This question eventually leads us towards one of the most important concepts in Vedanta, which is Atman. Atman is often translated to as self, but the translation can be misleading because when we hear self, we immediately think about our personality and ego. Atman is pointing towards something deeper, the fundamental object of experience, the consciousness through which everything else is experienced. And this is where Tatwamasi becomes extraordinary. Tat means that, traditionally referring to Brahma, which is the ultimate reality. Tvam means you, but not necessarily the individual personality you normally identify with. And Asi means are. So you are that. This is where Advaita Vedanta introduces the idea of non duality. Advaita literally means not two. And this is important because our ordinary experience is fundamentally dualistic. We experience ourselves as one thing and the world as another. There is me and there is everything else. Advaita questions whether that separation is ultimately real. And the easiest analogy that I've found is the ocean and the wave. The wave has a name, it has a shape, it has a beginning and an end. You can point at it and say that's a wave. But if the wave could somehow become self aware, it might believe that it was an independent thing, separate from the ocean. But the wave isn't made of something different from the ocean. The wave is the ocean appearing as a wave. Its individuality is real at one level, but its separation is not absolute. And Vedanta makes a similar argument about us. We are obviously different at a surface level. I have my thoughts, you have yours. I have my memories, you have yours. I have my body, you have yours. But the question is whether the individuality represents our ultimate ontology. An ontology is simply the study of what something fundamentally is. So the question becomes, are we fundamentally separate beings who happen to exist in the same universe, or are we expressions of one underlying reality, temporarily appearing as separate individuals? Now, that is the philosophical territory that Tatwamasi is pointing towards. And I think this is where the idea becomes much more personal. Because if my identity isn't ultimately limited to my achievements, my failures, my relationships, my appearance, my reputations, for example, or even my personality, then maybe I don't have to spend my entire life desperately trying to construct a version of myself that feels worthy enough. Now, that doesn't mean that the ambition becomes meaningless. It doesn't mean you stop working or you stop caring. It simply means that you begin to distinguish between what you experience and what you fundamentally are. And that distinction is enormous because your life will keep changing. You will lose people, you'll meet people, you'll succeed, you'll fail. One day you'll become someone you never expected to become. You'll outgrow versions of yourself that you once thought were permanent. Everything is going to move. The deeper question here isn't how to stop everything from changing. Perhaps it's to understand what remains when everything changes. Now, this is where Tatwamasi leaves me. I feel like this is not a neat answer. Actually, almost the opposite. It leaves me with a question that I think is much more valuable. When I remove everything that I can observe, my body, my thoughts, my emotions, my memories, my identity, what exactly is left to call me? To be honest, I don't know if I have the answer. Maybe I'm not supposed to have it yet, but I think that's precisely why I wanted to talk about this, because I'm at a point in my life where I am beginning to ask these questions, and I want to remember what it felt like when I had these questions first in my mind. Maybe 10 years from now, when I'll watch this, I'll disagree to half of it. And honestly, I'd like that, because that would mean I kept scratching. I kept myself curious and I was thinking about it. Tatvamasi, you are that. I don't think I've understood what those words completely mean, but I think that I've finally started understanding why people have spent thousands of years trying to understand these. Thank you.